Iran's Ayatollah Ali Khamenei executed in an Israeli airstrike. Is this prophecy? Reported across multiple major outlets, not just initial reports or unverified rumors. As of February 28, 2026, the following reputable sources are all reporting that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has passed following an Israeli airstrike, with U.S. support. NPR, The Washington Post, CNN, BBC. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the nation, describing the destruction of Khamenei's compound and stating there were many signs the supreme leader was, in his words, no longer gone. Iran denied it. Iranian state media insisted Khamenei was safe and sound. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi claimed the supreme leader was steadfast and firm in commanding the field. But the American intelligence assessments held firm. The Israeli sources held firm. And the satellite imagery of the supreme leader's heavily fortified Tehran compound told its own story. Heavy damage, smoke, rubble where reinforced walls had stood hours earlier. You will be shocked by 5 facts about this. Number 1. How the strike unfolded. Let me reconstruct what happened, step by step. Because the scale of this operation is unlike anything Israel has ever attempted in its entire history as a nation. And the details matter. They matter militarily. They matter historically. And as you're about to discover, they matter prophetically in ways that most people watching the news tonight have not even begun to consider. This morning, around sunrise Tehran time, the skies over Iran changed forever. Israel launched what military officials are now calling the largest single-day air sortie in the history of the Israeli Air Force. Not the largest strike against Iran, the largest strike against any country, ever, in the entire existence of the State of Israel. Approximately 200 Israeli fighter jets crossed into Iranian airspace in coordinated waves. 200. To put that number in perspective, the Israeli Air Force is estimated to have around 340 combat aircraft in its entire fleet. That means Israel committed nearly 60% of its total fighter strength to a single operation on a single day. That is not a strike. That is not a raid. That is a full national commitment. Israel put the majority of its offensive air power into the skies over Iran simultaneously, knowing that while those jets were over enemy territory, its own skies would be more vulnerable than at any point since the Yom Kippur War. That decision alone tells you everything you need to know about how Israel's leadership assessed the threat. You do not commit 60% of your Air Force to a single operation unless you believe the alternative is worse than the risk. Unless you believe that not striking is more dangerous than leaving your own airspace exposed. They struck over 500 different targets. They dropped hundreds of munitions across the breadth of Iran. 500 targets. Not in a week. Not over the course of a sustained campaign. In a single day. Let those numbers land. 200 jets, 500 targets, hundreds of munitions, in one sunrise to sunset cycle. The sheer logistics of that, the aerial refueling, the target coordination, the deconfliction of flight paths, the real-time intelligence updates, the electronic warfare suppression required to blind Iranian radar. It represents a level of military planning that had been underway for months. This was not improvised. This was rehearsed, war-gamed, refined, and executed with a precision that stunned military analysts around the world. Now let me walk you through the targets, because what Israel chose to hit tells you exactly what they were trying to accomplish. And each category of target connects to a different dimension of what we'll study later in this video. The first category was leadership compounds. This was Israel's primary focus. The fortified residence of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei in Tehran. This was not a military base on the outskirts of the city. This was a compound in the capital, heavily reinforced, surrounded by layers of security, built to withstand exactly this kind of attack. Satellite imagery taken within hours shows catastrophic damage. Smoke, rubble, collapsed structures where hardened walls had stood since they were built decades ago. And Khamenei was not the only leader targeted. Reports indicate that senior IRGC commanders were hit in their own compounds and operational centers. President Masoud Pezeshkian was targeted. Defense officials, intelligence chiefs. The entire upper tier of Iran's political and military leadership was on the target list. This was not a strike designed to send a message. This was a strike designed to remove the people who receive messages. And here's what makes this so significant, and this is something that will become absolutely crucial when we reach Ezekiel's prophecy about Persia's role in the last days. Israel did not just target military capability. They targeted the decision-making apparatus of the Islamic Republic. The men who decide whether to enrich uranium. The men who decide whether to arm Hezbollah. The men who decide whether to launch ballistic missiles. The men who decide the strategic direction of the nation that Ezekiel names explicitly in his end times coalition. When you remove those men, you do not just change Iran's military posture, you change the trajectory of an entire nation. And when that nation is named in a 2,600-year-old prophecy, the implications extend far beyond geopolitics. The second category of targets was IRGC facilities. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is not just a military branch. It is the backbone of the Iranian regime. It controls vast segments of the economy. It operates the proxy networks. It runs the ballistic missile program. It manages the nuclear infrastructure, and it answers directly to the supreme leader. Israeli jets struck IRGC bases across multiple provinces, command centers, training facilities, communications hubs. The nerve system of the regime was targeted systematically, node by node. The third category was ballistic missile infrastructure, storage facilities, launch complexes, production sites, transporter erector launchers. The weapons that can reach Israeli cities in 12 minutes. The weapons that were being fired at Tel Aviv and Jerusalem throughout the day, those were the targets. The fourth category was nuclear-linked infrastructure. Facilities in Tehran, Isfahan, Qom, and Karaj that are connected to Iran's enrichment program, its research activities, and its weapons development pathway. The American component of the operation, Operation Epic Fury, placed particular emphasis on these targets. Bunker-buster massive ordnance penetrator bombs, the largest non-nuclear weapons in the American arsenal, were deployed against deeply buried and hardened sites that Israeli munitions alone could not reach. This is why American participation was essential. Israel could hit the leadership, but only the United States had the ordnance to reach the facilities buried hundreds of feet underground. Electronic warfare suppression aircraft accompanied the strike waves, jamming Iranian radar, disrupting communications, and creating corridors of electromagnetic silence through which Israeli jets could operate. Surface-to-air missile batteries were hit in the opening minutes. Command and control links between Iranian air defense nodes were severed. Within hours, Israeli military officials stated they expected to achieve air superiority over the skies of Iran by the following day. Air superiority over a nation of 88 million people in less than 48 hours. That is the scale of what we are witnessing. A photograph was reportedly shown to Prime Minister Netanyahu. Israeli sources described the destruction as complete. President Trump posted on Truth Social, calling Khamenei one of the most evil people in history and declaring him dead. Netanyahu addressed the nation, describing the destruction of Khamenei's compound and stating there were many signs the supreme leader was no longer alive. Israel did not just remove a military commander. They removed a theological authority. The supreme leader in Iran's system is not a president who can be replaced in an election cycle. He is not a general who can be replaced by the next officer in the chain of command. He is the Valier Faqih, the guardian jurist, the spiritual and political apex of an entire theocratic system. He is the living representative of a religious ideology that governs every aspect of Iranian national life. His authority was not derived from votes. It was derived from a theological framework that claims divine sanction. And when you remove that kind of authority from a theocratic state, the consequences are not just political, they are existential. The entire legitimacy structure of the Islamic Republic was built on the institution of the supreme leader. Without it, the regime doesn't just lose a leader, it loses its theological justification for existing. Now here's the question that connects this directly to Ezekiel. If the Islamic Republic as we know it falls, what replaces it? Does a secular government emerge? Does an even more hardline, IRGC-dominated junta take power? Does Iran fragment? Or does it seek survival by deepening its alliance with the one major power that has stood by it through this entire crisis? And if that power is Russia, and if that deepened alliance produces a military partnership that looks exactly like what Ezekiel described, then the removal of Khamenei is not the end of Iran's prophetic role. It could be the beginning of its next chapter. Hold that thought, because it becomes central to everything that follows. But before we get to the prophecy, you need to understand what happened next. Because Iran's response was immediate. It was massive, and it was ferocious. Within hours of the first Israeli strikes, Iran unleashed its response, and it was not measured. It was not calculated for proportionality. It was fury. Ballistic missiles launched toward Israel. Multiple salvos aimed directly at population centers. Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, the holiest and most populated cities in the nation, all targeted simultaneously. Drone swarms deployed in waves designed to overwhelm layered defense systems through sheer volume. And it did not stop at Israel. Iranian missiles targeted American and Allied military installations across the Persian Gulf. Bahrain, home to the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters, came under fire. Bases in Qatar were struck. A regional diplomat confirmed to Fox News that 8 people were injured in Qatar during one of the attacks, one of them in critical condition. The United Arab Emirates activated its air defense systems to intercept incoming projectiles. Facilities in Kuwait were targeted. Iran declared every American and Israeli interest in the entire region a legitimate target and vowed what it called a crushing response with capabilities the world had not yet seen. And here's the detail I need you to hold on to, because it becomes deeply relevant when we reach Jesus' words in Matthew 24. Ballistic missiles launched from Iran take approximately 12 minutes to reach Israel. 12 minutes. That is the window between a launch detection and potential impact. 12 minutes for a family to reach a shelter. Sirens sounded across Israel throughout the afternoon. Millions of people crowded into bomb shelters. Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz declared a special and immediate state of emergency across the entire country. Iron Dome activated. David's sling activated. The Arrow missile defense system engaged incoming ballistic threats at altitude. Every layer of Israel's defensive architecture operating simultaneously under live fire. Hospitals moved patients underground. Schools were shuttered. Workplaces closed. Public gatherings banned. Reservists called up nationwide. The country was in full lockdown, bracing for the next wave. The region was now in open war. Not a skirmish. Not an exchange. Open, sustained, multi-front war. And the escalation was not finished. Because there were other players watching, other forces preparing, and what they did next threatened to turn a two-nation conflict into something far larger, something that connects directly to one of the most detailed military prophecies in the entire Bible. But we'll get there. First, you need to understand what the death of Khamenei actually means inside Iran. Because most people in the West have no idea how much power this one man held. Most people in the Western world think of a supreme leader the way they think of a president or a prime minister, a political figure, a head of state, replaceable through elections or succession. That is not what the supreme leader of Iran was. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was not a figurehead. He was not ceremonial. He was the absolute center of gravity for the entire Islamic Republic. Every major decision in Iran flowed through him or required his approval. And I need you to understand the specific areas he controlled, because this is what makes his removal so seismically significant. He controlled Iran's nuclear policy. Every decision about enrichment levels, about facility construction, about cooperation or obstruction with international inspectors came from his office. He controlled IRGC strategy. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the most powerful military and economic entity in Iran, answered directly to the supreme leader. Not to the president, not to parliament, to him. He controlled proxy networks, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, Iraqi militias. The funding, the weapons, the strategic direction, all of it flowed through channels that terminated at his desk. And critically, he blocked diplomatic concessions. Reports from U.S. officials indicate that the Trump administration made repeated attempts to negotiate. Olive branches were extended through envoys in Oman and Geneva. But Khamenei personally refused to make concessions on the nuclear program, on ballistic missiles, on proxy support, on the crackdown against his own people. He was the last hurdle. Those were the exact words used by a U.S. official on a background call. The supreme leader was the last hurdle between the region and stability. Now he's gone. And the question that every intelligence agency on Earth is trying to answer right now is this: does his removal destabilize the regime, or does it harden it? Because here's what most people don't realize. The Iranian theocracy has succession mechanisms already in place. The Assembly of Experts, a body of senior clerics, is constitutionally responsible for selecting a new supreme leader. Iran's IRGC had already prepared successors for top commanders, understanding that in a war scenario, leadership would be targeted. Khamenei himself reportedly had pre-prepared successors identified. So this is not necessarily the end of the regime. It could be, if internal fractures widen, if the Iranian people, who have already endured brutal crackdowns on protests, see this as an opportunity. If the IRGC fragments over succession disputes, the regime could collapse from within, but it could also consolidate. A hardened, desperate, vengeful leadership could emerge from the rubble. An IRGC-dominated successor could be even more aggressive than Khamenei. And here's why this matters prophetically, and this connects directly to what we'll discover in Ezekiel 38. The prophecy doesn't describe a weakened Iran. It describes an Iran that is part of a powerful, coordinated coalition. So the question becomes, does Iran's current crisis lead to weakness? Or does it lead to deeper alliance with the one nation that has been standing by its side through all of this? And if you've been paying attention to the news over the past decade, you already know which nation I'm talking about: Russia. Hold that thought. But first, we need to talk about the American role in all of this. Because the United States did not stumble into this conflict, this was planned, and the planning reveals something important. Let me reconstruct the American side of this operation, because it tells you something crucial about the nature of this conflict and about the deliberate, calculated path that led to today. This did not happen overnight. The military buildup had been underway for months. The USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group positioned near Haifa. The USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea. American destroyers deployed across the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Fighter jets pre-positioned not just in Israel, but in Jordan and at bases throughout the Gulf. Tanker aircraft, AWACS command platforms, Tomahawk missile batteries, ballistic missile interception systems. The pieces had been moving into place for weeks, quietly, deliberately, waiting for the order. And behind the military preparation, there was diplomacy. The Trump administration sent its top negotiators into the region repeatedly. Steve Witkoff, the special envoy. Jared Kushner, working around the clock across multiple capitals. Meetings in Oman, then Geneva, then back channels through Gulf intermediaries. The offer was on the table. Negotiate on nuclear enrichment, pull back ballistic missile development, rein in proxy networks, address the crackdown on Iranian civilians. The Trump administration, according to officials, was initially willing to set aside some of these demands just to get agreement on the nuclear issue alone. Iran refused, and when diplomacy failed, the doctrine took over. Peace through strength. The principle that Trump ran on. The principle that says some actors in the Middle East only understand force. And when every peaceful option has been exhausted, decisive action is not just justified, it's necessary. There's an important precedent here, and this connects to the pattern of escalation that becomes prophetically significant later. During the 12-day war in June of 2025, as Israel and Iran exchanged devastating blows, it was President Trump who launched Operation Midnight Hammer, a U.S. strike operation that forced Iran to back down. Iran responded with a single retaliatory strike against a base in Qatar, and then effectively stood down. And it was Trump, personally, who called off further Israeli strikes when he saw an opening for a deal. One man decided the outcome. That happened once. The question tonight is whether it can happen again. Because Trump told Axios in an interview today that he believes he has several off-ramps from Operation Epic Fury. He said it could end in 2 or 3 days. He said he could tell the Iranians, "See you again in a few years if you start rebuilding your programs." Force plus off-ramp. Strength plus an open door. That is the strategy. But here's what makes today different from June 2025. And this is something that should sit with you as we move into the prophecy section. In June, the supreme leader was alive. The regime was intact. There was someone to negotiate with, someone to accept an off-ramp, someone to order a stand-down. Tonight, that man is reportedly dead. And when there is no one at the top of a theocratic regime to accept a ceasefire, the question of what happens next becomes far more dangerous, far more unpredictable, and far more aligned with the kind of chaos Scripture describes in the last days. But the threat is not just from Iran itself, because the regime built something over decades that operates even without its supreme leader. A network. a web of armed groups stretching from Beirut to Sana'a. And that network is activating right now. Because everything I've just shown you, the strike, the retaliation, the proxies, the alliances, the encirclement, all of it needs to be held up against what Scripture actually says. The disciples had asked Jesus a direct question: "What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" And this was his answer: wars, rumors of wars, nations rising against nations, kingdoms clashing with kingdoms, and all of it described not as the end itself, but as the beginning of sorrows. That phrase, beginning of sorrows, is Odin in the original Greek. It literally means birth pains. And here's what every mother listening to this already understands about birth pains. They do not remain constant. They escalate. Each contraction comes harder than the last, faster than the last, closer together than the last. And they build towards something that, once it begins, cannot be stopped. Now remember the timeline I walked you through earlier, and ask yourself if you see the pattern Jesus described. Israel and Iran exchanged direct military strikes for the first time in modern history. Twice in a single year. Spring and October. That was a contraction. The 12-day war, a devastating regional conflict. Operation Midnight Hammer. American involvement, casualties, a temporary ceasefire, harder, faster, more intense, another contraction. Today, a full-scale preemptive strike by Israel and the United States, the largest Israeli air sortie in history. 500 targets. Each escalation is larger. Each conflict is more dangerous. Each crisis arrives faster than the one before. The contractions are intensifying, exactly as Jesus said they would. And yet, notice his instruction: "See that ye be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." The end is not yet. This is critical. Jesus did not say these events are the end. He said they are birth pains, signs, markers on a prophetic timeline that God has already written from beginning to end. They point towards something, but they are not the thing itself. He told us wars would come. He told us not to be alarmed. Not because the events don't matter, but because God is not surprised by them. These things must come to pass. They are not accidents. They are not chaos. They are the unfolding of a plan that was established before the foundation of the world. This fits the pattern of intensifying geopolitical contractions perfectly. Not fulfillment, but stage setting. The birth pains are increasing, and the direction they're pointing is unmistakable. But Matthew 24 is not the only passage that speaks into this moment, because there is an Old Testament prophecy that mentions one specific nation by name, a nation that is at the center of tonight's headlines. And when you hear its ancient name read aloud from the text of Ezekiel, you are going to feel the weight of what we're witnessing. Now turn to Ezekiel chapter 38 and listen carefully, because what I'm about to read you was written over 2,600 years ago by a Jewish priest in Babylonian exile, and it mentions by name the nation that is burning tonight. Ezekiel 38:5. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Persia, right there in the text, named explicitly, not symbolically, not through allegory or typology, by its ancient name, Persia. And Persia is the ancient name for modern-day Iran. The nation was called Persia internationally until 1935. The identification is not debated among scholars. Persia is Iran, the nation launching ballistic missiles at Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa right now. the nation whose leadership compounds are smoldering in rubble. That nation is named in a 2,600-year-old prophecy about the last days. Now let me give you the broader context, because Persia doesn't appear alone in this prophecy. It appears as part of a coalition. Ezekiel 38:1-6 describes a massive multinational force that comes against Israel in the latter days. The coalition is led by Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, widely identified by scholars as Russia, a power from the far north. Alongside Russia in this coalition are Persia, which is Iran, Kush, identified as Sudan or Ethiopia, Put, identified as Libya, Gomer and the House of Togarmah, linked to modern Turkey and Central Asia. A northern-led, multinational coalition with Iran as a named and central member, attacking a restored Israel. Now, here's where I need to be very careful. And this is where responsible Bible study matters more than dramatic storytelling. Because there is something that this event is, and there is something that it is not. This event is Israel striking Iran. Ezekiel 38 describes Iran attacking Israel. The direction is reversed. In tonight's events, Israel is the aggressor. In Ezekiel's prophecy, Israel is the target. That is a significant difference. This event does not match the scenario Ezekiel describes. Furthermore, and this is the critical detail that I've been building toward since the beginning of this video, Ezekiel describes a specific condition that must exist in Israel before this invasion takes place. Ezekiel 38:11. And thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates. Israel must be dwelling securely, at rest, living in unwalled villages, without bars or gates. A nation that feels completely safe. Is Israel dwelling securely tonight? No. Sirens are screaming. Bomb shelters are full. Reservists are mobilized. The entire country is under missile attack. This is not a nation at rest. This is not a people dwelling without walls. So this is not the Gog and Magog invasion. The preconditions have not been met. But, and this is where it gets deeply significant, even though this is not Ezekiel's invasion, this event keeps Persia at the absolute center of the prophetic landscape. Iran remains the named player in the coalition Ezekiel described. And the alliances forming around Iran right now, Russia's military partnership, proxy networks spanning the Middle East, coordination with Turkey, these are structural alignments that match the coalition Ezekiel described 26 centuries ago. And here's the question that should keep every student of prophecy watching. Could the aftermath of tonight's events, the potential weakening or collapse of Iran's current regime, the deepening of Russia-Iran cooperation in response to Western aggression, the hardening of proxy networks, could all of this be stage setting for the very coalition Ezekiel described? Remember what I said in Scene 4. A weakened, desperate Iran might seek deeper alliance with Russia. A new regime, possibly more hardline, possibly IRGC-dominated, might be even more willing to join the Northern Coalition that Ezekiel saw. This is not the climax. This is stage setting. The players are aligning, the names are matching, the geography is correct. And Persia, the nation at the center of tonight's crisis, is named in the text. But there is another prophecy that speaks even more directly to what is happening. Turn to Zechariah chapter 12. Because what you're about to hear sounds like it was written this afternoon. Zechariah 12:2-3. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about. when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. A cup of trembling, a burdensome stone, two images, and both of them describe with disturbing accuracy what the world is experiencing right now. The cup of trembling means a cup of reeling, a cup of staggering. Every nation that involves itself with Jerusalem becomes intoxicated with the burden of it, disoriented, destabilized, staggering under consequences they never anticipated. The burdensome stone means a weight that injures everyone who tries to lift it. Every nation that entangles itself with the fate of Jerusalem comes away cut, wounded, damaged. Now look at the world tonight. Sirens in Jerusalem, missiles arcing toward the holy city, Gulf states that host American bases absorbing Iranian retaliation they never asked for, European capitals issuing emergency travel advisories, oil markets spiking, global shipping rerouting, stock exchanges trembling, the United Nations in emergency session. Every nation that has touched this conflict, every single one, is reeling. And Zechariah says, "This is what happens to all the people of the earth who burden themselves with Jerusalem. Not some nations, all of them. The cup of trembling is being poured tonight, and the nations are staggering." That part of the prophecy is not theoretical. It is not distant. It is happening right now, in real time, on every screen on the planet. But now, I need to slow down. Because as compelling as these prophetic connections are, there are things this event is not. And saying clearly what it is not matters just as much as showing what it might be. This is the most important section of this entire video, because this is where credibility lives or dies. And I refuse to sacrifice truth for clicks. So let me be clear, this is not Armageddon. Armageddon is described in Revelation 16 as a gathering of nations for a final battle in the Valley of Megiddo. That is a specific event at the end of the tribulation period. We are not there. This is not the second coming. Christ returns after a specific sequence of prophetic events, including the tribulation, the abomination of desolation, and cosmic signs. Those have not occurred. This is not Daniel's 70th week. The final 7-year period described in Daniel 9:27 involves a covenant confirmed with many and a specific midpoint desecration. We have not seen that covenant. This is not proof that anyone is the Antichrist. I am not naming Khamenei. I am not naming Trump. I am not naming Netanyahu. I am not naming any living or dead person as a fulfillment of end times prophecy. God has an order, a timeline, a structure. Events do not skip ahead. They do not jump out of order. What we are witnessing tonight is a tremor, not the earthquake, a contraction, not the delivery, a sign, not the fulfillment. And the difference matters. Because when we confuse stage setting with fulfillment, we lose credibility. We cause fear instead of faith. We produce panic instead of preparation. My job is not to scare you. My job is to show you what Scripture says, lay it alongside what's happening, and let you see the patterns with your own eyes. And then to point you not toward fear, but toward the one who told us these things would happen so that we would be ready when they did. So what happens next? Because tonight's events could unfold in several very different directions, and every one of them has prophetic implications. Let me walk through the realistic scenarios, not as a prophet, but as someone who has studied both the geopolitical landscape and the prophetic text carefully. Scenario 1. Limited campaign. The strikes achieve their objective. Iran's military capability is degraded. A ceasefire is negotiated within days, as Trump suggested to Axios. The regime survives, but is weakened. A new supreme leader is appointed through the Assembly of Experts. Tensions de-escalate. And here's what should catch your attention about this scenario. If Iran is weakened and Israel emerges victorious, Israel's sense of security increases dramatically. And if Israel begins to feel safe, remember what Ezekiel said about dwelling securely. The best-case scenario tonight could be the very thing that sets up the next prophetic stage. Scenario 2. Proxy escalation. More alliances tested. Scenario 3. Regime instability. The supreme leader's death creates a power vacuum. IRGC factions compete for control. The Assembly of Experts fractures. Iranian citizens, emboldened by the regime's weakness, take to the streets as Trump urged them to. The theocracy destabilizes from within. And the question becomes whether what replaces it is better or worse. Scenario 4. Temporary ceasefire. This has precedent. During the 12-day war in June 2025, Trump personally called off Israeli strikes when he saw an opening for de-escalation. Iran's foreign minister has already hinted today at least a small interest in a diplomatic path. If the regime is desperate enough, a ceasefire could emerge. But without a supreme leader to enforce it, its durability is uncertain. Scenario 5. Deeper Russia-Iran alliance. Russia has already condemned the strikes. Moscow sees Iran as a strategic partner. If the regime calls for help, if Russia perceives an opportunity to expand its influence in the vacuum, the very coalition Ezekiel described could deepen and accelerate. None of these are predictions. All of them are possibilities. And every single one of them moves the prophetic landscape in a direction that demands our attention.